rolling stock was pretty much controlled by mostly by the Czechs.
Can you hear me? Good. We'll make an early start because as this is the last session of the day, and this is ridiculous. It's quite horrid, really. Anyway, as this is the last session of the day, and we've got the reception afterwards. We don't want to overrun, so we'll make an early start in the hope that we can keep to time. The title is a bit misleading, really, because we're not going to be talking particularly about the eInfraNet project. We're certainly not going to be talking about ENPG, which is a committee that got wound up a good year or so ago. But we are going to cover some policy issues as opposed to technical issues, which we feel are of considerable importance to the NREN community. I'll be talking first about cloud computing and the potential roles for NRENs there and the potential for a European approach to cloud computing. And then Brian will be talking about data storage issues, particularly Brian's from HEAnet, so particularly in the context of the Republic of Ireland. You've just pinched our queen, of course, so maybe you're not a republic anymore. And that, of course, is a big driver for early adoption of cloud computing. And then Marjut is going to talk about green IT and reducing the carbon footprint, which is in itself a big driver for cloud computing. So from the policy point of view, clouds are of great interest to the funding bodies, and I think of great relevance to NRENs. Now, if I press this button, will it start? Yes. So I'm the Executive Secretary of JISC, which is the UK funding body that funds the IT infrastructure for universities, colleges and the research community, as well as actually funding quite a lot of innovation programs, some of which are in the cloud area and which I'll be referring to later, or certainly I have the web addresses for them. I've got rather more slides with rather more information on them than I will say, so I'm inviting you to multi-process. You can read the slides, thus saving me the bother of reading the slides, and I'll talk about what I was going to talk about anyway. I feel I don't need to give you sort of a briefing about what cloud computing is. Suffice to say, we're talking about the idea that a researcher, in this context, the research community, can take their IT resources, whether it's storage requirements or processing compute resources, as a utility off the internet without investing in the capital equipment, and particularly without investing in the fairly serious maintenance costs associated with the people to operate the machines and the systems programmers and so forth. So certainly there is a significant cost-cutting element. But there are quite a lot of concerns, particularly from researchers about using the cloud, concerns about security and longevity of service and so forth. And clearly these are issues that have to be considered. Cloud computing can be looked at as something that works at a number of different levels, whether you're talking about pulling the software or application of the service, or whether you're talking about using the cloud as an infrastructure provision. Actually, it's the hardware provision. It's that last element that I'm particularly going to cover. But as I said before, there are a number of different layers. The main advantages of using clouds is the speed with which you can meet sudden peaks in demand, and similarly the ease with which you can cope with sudden drops in demand. You're not left carrying underutilized hardware and facilities. So flexibility is a key driver. There's also quite a strong green approach to it. An awful lot of relatively lightly loaded computers, often sitting under the researcher's desk, will have a much bigger carbon footprint than a relatively heavily used larger facility. So we're finding in the UK, where we're investing at the moment something like £12.5 million across a number of different cloud services. And in particular, HEAnet is acting as a broker to procure cloud resources. We are not, in the UK at any rate, talking about building our own large data center and using that. We are talking about buying it from commercial providers. And that's because the UK market can offer that kind of facility, but I fully accept that might not hold true in every country. The main interest is coming from not the really big universities. They tend to already have very large facilities. And I think it would be culturally harder for a very large university to sort of dispense with a massive IT resource. They'd probably find that rather too high risk. But the smaller research universities are beginning to find increasing computing demands from the research community hard to fund and hard to meet. Again, it comes back to both cost and flexibility and the speed with which you can respond to change. So it is the sort of still significant research universities, but not the very top ones that are expressing the most interest. And interestingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, it's often the finance director or the head of the university administration that's most interested in this approach. Some IT directors are very keen on it. They don't see the future of their service and the future of their career as being inextricably tied up with the provision of large computing facilities. But on the other hand, quite a few IT directors do see it as tied up. So I think we have a cultural problem there to consider. It actually reminds me of the big upheaval in IT services that took place, I guess, towards the end of the 70s, early 80s, when much more distributed computing came in to replace mainframes or DECs or some of the mini computers they had there. There was a definite feeling there that IT services were doomed, that they didn't have the mainframe and they'd have no work to do, and they were wrong. I'll skip that one because I need to keep to time. Another advantage of cloud computing is that it's easier to collaborate with businesses and outside organizations. An interest that, again, we've got in the UK from one of our industry bodies. The gaming industry is quite important in the UK, and it's typically made up of often a relatively young male eating a lot of pizzas and drinking a lot of coffee, writing a gaming application on his own laptop. That requires almost no computing power to do that. But then when it wants to launch into a service, it will usually be connected to the internet, and there is a sudden and huge requirement for computing facilities, which of course it would be hard to get the venture capital to meet. Cloud computing again can offer flexibility against that. Universities of course are always very interested in spin-off companies, and a cloud provision can again offer more flexibility than having to capitalize IT within a company. So this slide sort of summarizes some of the main drivers. But we're still up against the fact that a lot of researchers are reluctant to move their application onto a cloud. They're convinced that the American Patriot Act, well, first of all, they're convinced that their data will end up in America. And they're convinced the American Patriot Act only has one purpose, and that is to enable the American government to look at their data. So there's a great deal of mistrust. They feel that the data and an application running on a machine by their left knee under the desk has got to be the safest and most secure way of looking after things. But of course, if it's not being well backed up, and if it's not in a particularly clean and sound environment, I would argue that that's possibly a very insecure way of getting your computing provided. So we have to tackle the trust issue from the research community. We have to persuade researchers to change their way of working and move on to a cloud. Now, the research funding bodies are often, research councils and so forth, are often really quite interested in this because a lot of their grant, one way or another, gets tied up in hardware and the support of that hardware. if they can get the actual computing done more cheaply, and I'm not just talking at the supercomputing end, in fact the supercomputing tends to be a rather special case and arguably is not a strong cloud candidate. I'm talking about the more conventional and smaller research projects. If research councils can spend less on the hardware, then clearly they'll be able to fund more actual research. So it's a real area of interest to them. They would wish to see, where appropriate, researchers changing their way of working, changing their processes. So we have to find some solution that the research can trust. We also have to persuade IT directors that taking applications off the cloud is a more effective, more professional way of getting their IT, providing their IT service to the community. But it isn't the answer for all applications. One thinks of clinical trials in medical health where the data is enormously sensitive, and indeed it would be quite illegal for the data to be able to leak. Well, maybe there are arguments there for not putting that kind of solution on the cloud. Now, I would argue that the NRENs are the ideal people to provide cloud provision. That wouldn't necessarily mean building large national data centers. It could be acquired from commercial providers. But what I would suggest is that the traditional pay-as-you-go type model that Amazon and Google and so forth offer is not the kind of cloud provision that we're looking for. It would have all the disadvantages that pay-as-you-go networking would have, and I do not know off the top of my head that any country actually charges for its NREN through a pay-as-you-go, through something that actually would discourage the use of the very national asset that we're all so keen to provide. And I think the same would hold true for cloud computing. We do not want to discourage its use. So some models that have high I/O charges, for instance, would seem to me to be exactly the wrong approach. NRENs, of course, are also usually the manager of security and access management processes, whether that's the shibboleth type thing or certification, which is so much more popular in the e-science community. But why I think an NREN should do this is because a country then ends up essentially with a private cloud, certainly private, within the sense that it would be restricted to the communities we tend to serve, which would be typically the research community, the education community, and in some cases the cultural community as well. If you keep it private to that, I think we're going a long way to addressing the trust and the privacy concerns that the researchers would have. They trust the network, they trust the network providers, they would trust them to provide a genuine private cloud. You would be able to say to each researcher, you'd be able to tell the researcher where their job was being run, the kind of environment it was running in, the way in which the system was looked after, the way in which it was backed up, and what kind of safeguards there would be against failure or some kind of environmental catastrophe, which it does rather look is the kind of thing that we're going to have to face increasingly as global warming seems to actually be taking a hold. What we're actually ending up with is more extremes of weather rather than necessarily a nice warm climate for Northern Europe and perhaps a rather too hot climate for Southern Europe. We're actually just ending up with extremes of weather, and that leads us to flooding and so forth. I mean, Australia, of course, is the prime example there. And it's those kind of environmental disasters that we'll have to increasingly plan for. Now, if it makes sense to build a private cloud at the national level, and I think it certainly does for larger countries. I think maybe smaller countries will find it hard to get the economies of scale unless they collaborate on a rather broader scale. I mean, one thinks, of course, immediately of the very successful HEAnet collaboration, and the Scandinavian countries would be in an ideal position with their history of HEAnet to look at this model, and perhaps Mariam will say something about that. But I think I would go further and would argue that we should be lobbying, particularly the Commission, to look at the possibility of the provision of a pan-European cloud. If it makes sense to do it at a national scale, the economies of scale should be even greater if we look at it at the European level. And of course one could go further and talk about links with the United States and other countries. I will finish with a set of not very short web addresses for various reports that we've produced over the past year or so looking into this issue. I wonder whether we should take questions after each speaker or right at the end. Do you have a preference? Well, if anybody's got, we're doing okay for time. I mean, if people have got questions now, we can take some questions on the cloud, but bearing in mind Brian will be talking about data storage in particular next, and Marjut about the sort of green IT agenda. There's a gentleman there.
So you said, I completely agree that that cloud makes sense on a European scale. I've just been promoting the same thought last Monday on the terrain attack meeting.
Oh, good. Well, terrain would have a big role to play here, I'd have thought.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
You said, though, we should lobby the European Commission for funding to build one. I'm wondering, in your opinion, is it viable to think in the direction of obtaining funding for building and operating such a thing from national resources?
Build's an awkward verb here because, of course, sometimes it might be to procure.
Procure, acquire.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you need money to run it. And I'm
well,
thinking
yes.
that's going to replace a significant chunk of university IT infrastructure that universities are now paying for.
Yes.
So could we use that
yes.
to pay for that and not ask the Commission?
Clearly, at the national level, it would be university funding that one would look for to maintain the sustainability, because they're the people who are paying it already. They would make the cost saving. I think we're in the, I suppose the main reason that I would like to spend European money is because Britain's bankrupt at the moment, and Europe's, partly because Europe's taken all our money, and therefore we'd like some of it back. Maybe build wasn't necessarily the right word, but you're absolutely right. I think the funding initially will have to come from the research and university community at the national level. But you could get some significant pump priming. And after all, if you remember the early days of Dante, the 10, what was it, 10 something network? 1034, yes. That was very largely funded by the Commission in the early years. So I think, I think there's good reason to say to the Commission, this is a relatively high risk activity. You've got lots of money. You're there to take risks. And here's one for you to consider.
Just a remark. I think if we are starting initially by taking university money to build this, then we would poison somehow the atmosphere for actually proliferating this good initiative. That's why, in my opinion, we need EU funding to show that this is a good and viable thing. And then for the sustainability in the long run, of course, we'll have the users pay. But that's exactly why
yes.
This will never move if there are no initial money. Yeah.
And actually, that was the rationale in the
yeah.
UK. We got money actually direct from the Treasury to start it up, but it has to be sustained by university funding. I mean, they're the people who pay for the computing resources at the moment. The whole thesis is that they will be able to pay less. But the startup costs the oxygen of central funding for startup costs is definitely attractive. And as I say, even in our difficult times, we got funding from the UK government.
Bill Cinerno here. Just a quick comment
I
on that.
hope you noticed I'm plugging green.
Yes, thank you very much, Malcolm. Appreciate that. Just a point here. You should check out a company called Anomaly. They were covered in The Economist magazine. They are brokering computing services from various private companies, pharmaceutical companies and so forth, and presenting that as a cloud service to other organizations. They are negotiating with these companies to offer the cloud services for free to the research and education community, and they get a tax break. So there's a phenomenal amount of computing resources out there that can be aggregated, that's underused at private companies, that can be provided to the research community. Now, there's always a danger with the word free, I understand that, but I think you have to look very carefully at building your own or deploying your own infrastructure with these other services coming online.
Is that restricted to a particular industry, or is it multi-node?
They are Anomalies negotiating with all sorts of companies, automobile manufacturers, principally pharmaceutical companies, because most of the pharmaceutical companies have huge computing resources and clusters which sit idle for great periods of time. So it's taking the Amazon model, but it's distributing across many different companies, and they take care of all the management and interface.
The risk analysis you'd have to do there, of course, is for how long would it be free? Yes. And what say would you have if they change their mind? If there's no more questions, then I'll hand over to Brian, and I'll take this silly microphone off.
Thank you, Malcolm. Am I live? Am I live now? You all hear me? Okay. I'm just here to talk about HEAnet's data storage strategy and some of our activity as a result of that strategy. I think some of the themes you'll see here will reflect the broader themes that Malcolm has already discussed. So I'm quite happy to see that we're agreeing. I'm not going to get up on stage and start contradicting him, because I think he has some very excellent ideas, and luckily HEAnet strategy agrees with that too. So my name is Brian Boyle. I'm the Network Services Manager for HEAnet, and HEAnet is the Irish Research and Education Network Provider, just for those who may not have been familiar with HEAnet before, because I suppose in the bigger context of things, we're a reasonably small country and a reasonably small NREN as a result. What I'd like to discuss today then is the context around our data storage, the ecological, ICT ecological environment that we exist in. I want to touch on the data storage services in general and the ones that we think that we can provide. And I want to touch on the topic as well of centralizing service, not centralizing the implementation of your storage, but centralizing the provision of service. And that leads then down onto, should NRENs be involved in storage and being a central point of contact for storage at all? Just want to answer that question from my perspective and from HEAnet's perspective, and then as I said, to look at our activity in response to such an opinion. So I suppose the context comes from our client expectations. Our clients have been talking to us and telling us that they would really like some storage to be provided by somebody, but preferably by the NREN, because they see, for a number of reasons which I'll go into later, that we're ideally placed to help them with their storage needs. And currently the market isn't in a position, or may not be in a position, to help them in the style that they would like. I've also been involved in international developments, thankfully via the Terrain TF storage working group, and they've shown some excellent leadership in gathering up the various strands that are going on in other countries and other NRENs around Europe and beyond, and showing us what's going on and introducing us to vendors. I'll touch a little bit more in detail on TF storage. And in response to this demand bubbling up, we've also conducted our own survey with our own clients to find out exactly what they would like us to do and why they would like us to do it and how long they would like us to do it for, and based on all of that, how much they'd be willing to pay for anything that we might get involved in. And this has led to the identification on our part of a wide variety of strands that we could be involved in, from quick and cheap storage, bulk storage as a backup for users, to expensive, high performance, really high functionality storage, which might also attract a high cost. But what we've really found is it's not homogenous. People aren't looking for just one thing, one particular theme. They're looking for everything from storage to replace storage, which Malcolm has referred to, which is under some researcher's desk, to some way to access cloud storage, which is emerging, and which our users want to get involved in, but are a little bit confused as to which way to go about procuring or getting involved in. And we've seen that our clients say that they've many different users who would like to connect to this stuff, from researchers, their own MIS departments, their students, and interdepartmental groups, maybe libraries as well. So the international context, then, the TNC2011 TF storage group, I think, was set up in 2006? 2008, right. Well, it's done an awful lot of work in a very short space of time then. It's just to let those who don't know about it. It's open to all. Mostly NREN and IT services people from universities go to it, but also we see both appearances by vendors who want to turn up, by storage vendors who want to turn up and talk, and storage vendors who want to turn up and participate. And we do invite from time to time particular vendors to come and tell us all about what they're doing, which is kind of a friendly environment for them to give us a kind of a pre-tech, pre-sale speech. And as a result, from my participation there, I've seen an awful lot of examples of NRENs involved in national data storage activities. So a lot of people have started this already, and some are well on the road and are already presenting data storage services to their users from the NREN, and others are still building. And then there's also lots of implementations and integrations with infrastructure as a service by NRENs and bundling up storage in there too. The summary I've taken away from both my own clients and from the international perspective is that data storage is a very complex and very wide-ranging activity, much more so than many other services any other service that we've been asked to participate in to date, I think. It's for basically any ICT department that we deal with, or any NREN that I've talked to. It's not a core activity. Our core activity is providing networking and networking services to our users. This particular service could become the core activity. It could replace that in terms of, if we let it the scope grow, we'd do nothing else except this, and our network would suffer as a result. So we have to be careful to control the scope that we get involved in here. And it does, as I say, need an awful lot of work, from procurement through administration, through end-user support. There's an awful lot of challenges around this. So we've identified ourselves that there is a demand for a centralized storage service. Why are people looking for centralized storage? Well, what's wrong with the distributed model that people have been using up until now? What do you get from a centralized approach? Well, the most obvious one, I suppose, is economies of scale. I won't go into this one in too much depth. We all are familiar with if you can attract enough funding to buy for a bigger project, you'll probably get a cheaper per terabyte or per unit cost out of it. Elasticity of supply as well. So just this applies to cloud vendors as well as to if you're buying a big storage service for your own users that you're going to operate yourself. Your users will be able to presumably buy what they want when they want it, and increase it when they want it, and not have to do some horrible big reformat when they say, I want another 100 terabytes, please. And they can also gain easier access to high-end functionality, so things like version control or snapshots or disk deduplication. This kind of stuff is a huge once-off cost if you're buying a storage array. And if you're buying a bigger storage array, then you can share that cost out amongst everybody else, so that the cost of functionality comes down a little bit. And as Malcolm mentioned, a good hosting environment is very important for all of this, because a lot of people are forced, I suppose, by the distributed funding model that they've got at the moment, to keep their storage close to them, whether they want to or not, either under their desk or in a basement, or in their ICT department's data storage room, with their ICT department probably wishing they could use that space for something else. And you would hope that centralized storage certainly would provide you with better administration, so you'd have dedicated administrators rather than an harassed research student or MIS or ICT department person who has a lot of other tasks on their plate. And as a result, then, consequently, lower risks for your data if this is the case. I'll touch again on these topics from the user and the service provider's perspective. But for now, I want to say, why would an NREN necessarily get involved? We get asked for lots of things in NRENs, all sorts of services. We have to evaluate each one and say, really, does this fit? And I suppose some of the factors I think that lead to this fitting, and the same factors we apply to any service request, would be the excellent network. So where storage in the past would have had to be very, very close to the end user, just for simple bandwidth and latency requirements. Now our networks, even though they're WANs, look just like the LANs of 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and we can provide the same kind of service that you would have expected. The vendors who have storage, by the way, don't necessarily know this, so we conducted an information gathering exercise last year with vendors, where we got 10 different vendors in to talk to us and tell us what they had and what they thought they could supply, and we explained what we'd like them to supply. And one of the things they said is, well, if you want to provide storage to your users, it's just crazy. I mean, you'd need some kind of multi-gigabit network with really low latency. And we were able to say, well, actually, we kind of have one of those things, and most NRENs do. And once they realised that, and then the vendors don't necessarily know this, once they realised that, they went, oh, okay, well, that is possible. And suddenly they became very interested and very attached to us after that. Malcolm also mentioned the trust relationship, and I think that's very important as well. If we're going to write an SLA for our users, we're going to be writing it in English, and there's not going to be 60 pages of it with a small clause down the bottom to claim somebody's soul or something like that. So they'll trust us not to try and take advantage, and we'll trust them as well, not to try and over-leverage some contract with us, some service level agreement with us. And they also have a very strong influence over us. So our clients are also our owners in our case, and I think in most NREN's case, there's a very short loop between the client and the people who control the NREN. So they can tell us what to do, really. And we both have similar funding environments. So when somebody is providing funding for a project, they don't expect for that project to say, well, I need to talk to somebody in Prague, so I'm going to have to buy a circuit between Dublin and Prague. They expect the NREN in Dublin and in Prague to have some arrangement in place for doing this, and obviously that's the HEAnet. But the same thing applies, I suppose, for storage. Our funding people, our stakeholders, are increasingly saying, well, I don't want to pay for storage every time there's a project coming up which requires storage. I'd like to have some kind of national asset that we could leverage here, and direct people who are making applications for funding to go make use of the national network and the national data storage. And we might, I think, be able to offer cheaper offerings than commercial offerings. And that's kind of a bold statement to say, because the commercial environment is quite competitive, and people are highly motivated to keep their costs down. So how could we possibly do something any cheaper here? Well, we could look at providing SLAs which closely match what the users want, whereas the commercial operators really have to provide an SLA which matches what the world wants from them, or what, at least what a country or a particular market segment wants. Saying that if we have an end user base who are happy for a 9 to 5:30 SLA, then we can provide that, whereas the bigger providers have to go for the 24-hour instantaneous response with a help desk that matches all the hours of all the people that they have to deal with. And I think we can also deliver lower power costs, primarily because we don't have to charge VAT on top of the service that we have to deliver out to our clients, because we're a collective, not-for-profit organisation. And we're also obviously not looking for a profit margin. And importantly, we don't have to go and build a really fast, high-performance network to get to our users. It's already there. Commercial providers would either have to do this or somehow build a really high-performance network to us and figure out how to integrate with us. But they would have to possibly up their game to come to this market. And also, as I said earlier, we have a trust relationship, so we're not going to surprise our end users, and hopefully they're not going to surprise us. So there'll be no cost surprises, which is always the thing when you're procuring storage from the market. You're wondering, where's the trick? Where's the problem? Where am I going to come across some hidden licensing cost for something which I thought was bundled, but which actually isn't? And now my procurement is halfway through, and I'm stuck with a sudden escalation of 20% that I wasn't expecting. So the NRENs won't do that to their clients. At least I don't think they will. So the kind of storage services that we could be involved in, I'm not saying that we're going to get involved in all of these, because the laws of physics stand between us and getting involved in all of them. There's tightly coupled stuff where you've got your disk, your bus, your CPU. We're never going to be able to beat the physics involved there. At least I don't think we will. There's more loosely coupled stuff. I think we could get involved here. This is where you've got a nice simple client-server model and a local area network in between. Well, I think our wide area network could also be in there too. It has mostly the same characteristics. It's Ethernet, it's low latency, it's high bandwidth. And we can provide more bandwidth if you need it. And then there's the very loosely coupled. This is where, I suppose, another way of saying cloud environment, where people are far away from their storage, and the processing point might also be far away. There's a very quick graph just to show that the kind of environment that's out there. I suppose the x-axis is proximity to the end user, and the y-axis is let me see where it's managed. So the pen drive is right beside the user and managed by the user, whereas the cloud services are very far away from the user and not managed by them. And then in the middle, round here, is where is the kind of services that we're looking at trying to help our users out with. So what are we currently doing? What have we been doing to date? Well, HEAnet currently provides data center storage service to our users. So anybody who's involved in co-locating their equipment in our data centers gets to access our data storage. We don't like to extend it beyond there because it's very hard for us to write an SLA for them at the moment, given the kind of equipment that we have. But it is very highly scalable, so if they want another 10 terabytes or 50 terabytes, it's very easy for us to provide that to them. And it's very high functionality and high speed. So we can withstand multiple node failures, multiple disk failures, all that kind of thing, and we can give them snapshot functionality and automated hierarchical storage management, where it's moving infrequently accessed data onto the slower, cheaper disks. And we're also involved in data storage applications, FileSender, which Jan Meyer has provided a couple of presentations on this conference alone, and a BOF. We find it a very, very useful service. For those who haven't heard of it, it's a simple way of sending very large files around and gets away from people having to worry about setting up an FTP server or getting their institution to increase how much the size of an attachment can be. And media hosting as well, which we developed in-house and which acts as an enabler for people who have media that they want and they don't want to host on YouTube or Vimeo for some of the many reasons. I mean, they don't want to hand their intellectual property away, or they want to have no time limit on how long their media can be. Well, we can provide them with that, and we can help them embed it in their VLE or on their website or wherever they want. And tomorrow, in other words, in the future, we're looking at storage as a service provided by us within our network for our clients. And in the future, we're looking at how to provide them with access to cloud vendors. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail now. So the data storage as a service, that's, as I say, us providing disks in our network, within our network, managed nominally by HEAnet, though obviously we would be looking for other providers to help us with that, other vendors to provide us with that support, and a procurement framework, both to allow users to buy their own disk hardware if they want it, but also to give them access via a framework to cloud providers. So they don't have to do the procurement work. They don't have to attract every cloud vendor in, because we can maybe look at attracting in a selection with a national recruitment effort. But more on that later, and the challenges that I think we will face with procurement of cloud. So our own service is a reasonably simple thing, the kind of thing that we're planning. We published the RFT for this last week. I suppose I'll start over here. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have the end users in their client networks, and via an administrator requesting, via the provisioning service, which is federated, requesting a storage resource of some description, and that being configured onto the storage array and sent out to the high-end interconnects, and then out to our network and out to the end user application. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. We're not looking at a particularly complicated version of this. So if a user wants a block of storage that's automatically replicated in some live fashion, we can't really provide that. We're looking at two storage locations for them, and offline replication, if you like, or nearline replication. We're not looking for instantaneous replication and trying to overcome things like split brain and the other tricky things that come in if you try for instantaneous replication and users who depend on that. So that's just a very quick overview of the service that we're looking at. And I want to touch again then on the client motivation. What are they after here? What are they looking for from the service? Because you have to be very careful about how we provide it as a result. Well, they're looking to lower the cost, and they want more flexibility. So agility is definitely required. They want to eliminate the whole concept of a capital expenditure on this. They don't have some big, huge cost and then depreciation of it afterwards. And they want to lower their administration, so somebody else does the administration and takes on the risk of all this. Well, that means that service provider, and if the NREN is going to be a service provider in a national data storage project, that means you're looking for higher risk for the NREN, increased administration costs, a big capital expenditure, and trying to provide your client with a good service experience. So what does that basically mean for the service provider? Well, I suppose you've got to take this capital expenditure cost and you've got to recover it somehow. So you build that into your service charge. But that means that you're eventually going to come down to some rough comparison, which isn't too comfortable. Basically, you're going to say, I need X amount of euros per terabyte per year. And your user's going to say, I can buy 100 terabytes off the shelf for a much smaller amount of money than you're charging me. Why are you charging so much? It's because of all this high functionality and depreciation that you're building in here. And I think you've got to position the service correctly for your end users so they know exactly what you're providing and that they're not comparing you to a USB drive or a disk drive that they might pick up in the high street. And you've got to build a good commercial relationship with your vendor whilst remaining entirely within the procurement rules. So if you want to offset some of the depreciation risk, you might arrange with your procurement vendor that they'll maybe after 3 years take some of the hardware back and give you some credit for that hardware and refresh it. But if they're going to give you after 3 years hardware that'll last for another 3 years, you're into a 6-year agreement, and that's probably going to breach any procurement rule that you're allowed to have. So you've got to figure out how to work around that. And why else would the NREN be interested in all of this? I mean, we have the traditional motivations, I think. We want to stay close to our clients. We want to build services that leverage our network. We have a great network. Why aren't we using it more? Well, I think we are making good use of it, and this would make even more use of it. And you have to add extra value for your clients as well. They're paying us a yearly charge, and they want to see us increase value every year without any inordinate increase in cost. And also, of course, then behind our clients and behind us, there's our stakeholders and our funding bodies who are keen to see us make more use of what resources we have and to deliver more value every year and to reduce costs every year if we can. So I see there's some challenges with the providing for the cloud environment. The national data storage, where we're providing hardware for our users to use, basically, I think we have a reasonably good grip on that. At least I hope we do. In cloud storage and helping our users get access to cloud storage, I've found it quite challenging getting my head around it, and I think most people here are facing similar challenges. So the first thing when you go to regular EU procurement, I found it's a round peg for a square hole. The cloud storage providers are not providing the same commercial model that we're looking for when we publish the regular RFT. So as Malcolm mentioned, the pay-as-you-go model is quite common amongst cloud storage providers and quite popular for most of their users. And they're not really too interested in changing their model for one NREN sitting on the periphery of Europe as they would see it. And we have to try and, I think, challenge that perception for the cloud providers. And the same goes for all of us who are involved in trying to get access to a cloud provider. The definition of cloud, of course, what is it? Is cloud a business model, or is it just a name for a managed service? So I think it's got as many definitions as people want to attach to it. But I do know that the offerings from cloud providers are very different and difficult to compare. So if you get a response to a procurement framework that you put out there, it's going to be very hard. It's like trying to compare the various different mobile phone tariffs as a mobile phone user. I find it very tricky. I think I'm going to find comparing cloud offerings just as tricky. And Ireland, as I say, is a very small market. So the cloud providers, even if it was something for all of Irish research and education market, might just say, well, actually, that's still too small for us to turn around and change from our model or to respond to your RFT. So I think we need to look at the European HEI market and see if, as a group, we can come up with some way of attracting the interest of cloud providers. Okay, so I'll go quickly through what we've done to date. We've, with our clients, agreed the procurement requirements. We've drawn up an RFT specification, which was quite tricky. That was an awful lot of people tugging a huge, big tablecloth, I suppose, rather than a tug of war. So we eventually came up with a good framework model, a good contract, and as I say, we published last week on that. We still have the evaluation and award stages to go. And out of this, we're looking for a framework model that will last for 4 years, or up to 4 years, possibly less, and will allow us to access both data storage equipment and the cloud vendors. So my conclusions from all of this, I suppose, are that our clients do require storage, and they want it from their NREN, amongst other people. They want it from more than just us. They have a huge variety of requirements, so they know that the NREN can't answer them all, and they don't want us to just bend over backwards to sort them, but they do want to have us meet the needs that they see are the low-hanging fruit. I believe that NRENs do have a strategic role to play when it comes to a national data storage initiative. It's certainly a great use for our excellent networks, but we have to remember that we're part of the solution and not coming with one solution which fits all of the needs. And finally, just to say that the services will be very long-term and quite sticky. I don't know about you guys, but I still have a HEAnet server. Services in NRENs tend to hang around a long time. I think if you provide us an expensive storage solution, be prepared for it to stick around for a very long time. Thank you very much. I'll take questions if that's okay. Do we have time, Malcolm?
Yes.
Okay.
Any questions for Brian?
Is the mic on the way? It's on the way.
Brian, I was just looking at your paradigm of the service offering, and you got your request for storage, but what I didn't see was a billing charging response. Thinking of where we were, Pradeep, automate what you can. Have you thought about what sort of mechanisms you might use for that?
We have, and we've also thought about the shortcomings that that we have as an organisation when it comes to deciding these things. So we've evaluated based on the procurement research that we did last year. We've evaluated how much it might cost us to provide this service over time, and us to be able to provide our end users with different charging models, so per terabyte per month or so forth. But what I think what we could do to improve in future and to improve for any other service that's like this, that's a really high upfront cost, is to get buy-in from our users beforehand, because this is basically a build it and see if they'll come. And we have a fairly good idea that they will come because we surveyed them to find out, but we didn't write them into a contract. So now we're going to get involved in a procurement exercise, which we don't have to agree to, I suppose, at the end of the day, but we certainly intend to. And then we have to convince our users to agree with one of the charging models that they could go with. I think it's a shortcoming that we've learned from this experience. Okay, that seems good. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Malcolm.
I'll have to shout then. On data storage, there's many research bodies getting very concerned about longer-term preservation of storage. But a lot of data doesn't really need maintaining for the longer term. Are there, does the research funders in Ireland state a requirement on the research community to preserve? Does the Republic of Ireland place a requirement on their researchers to preserve the data for something like 10 years, which is the UK standard? And if so, would your service be seen as a way of by the government of meeting that requirement?
My answer is I believe it is, but I don't know for sure, because I don't apply for the research funding for these things, so I don't have to answer the question myself. We do have an initiative called eInfraNet, which seeks to help researchers with that problem and advise them on the long-term data curation aspects of their aspect. But as I say, that's for researchers, whereas we're looking at I suppose the broader education as well as research.
Yeah. There's no further questions. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
final speaker is Marjut Andler from CSC in Finland, and we're going green. I don't know. Okay. I think it's on all. I think they have it.
Okay, thank you. So I come from Finland, from CSC, the IT Center for Science. I have only been with this company for 4 months, so if in case I say something stupid or that might be the reason. When this request came to CSC about what could we talk with this Terena conference, we thought about our actions, what kind of things could we tell you, and this data center is something that occupies us a lot at the moment, and we thought that this is a good thing that we want to share with you, with this community. There are many data centers in Europe, as you all know, and during this presentation, when I present this story, I would like you to consider while listening whether this data center could be something, could be a solution for you too, because this is not something that is built for CSC only. And also, if you think that this is not possible for you, what kind of obstacles are there, so that we can understand it better. So this presentation will be split into two sections, so to say. The first one is more like an introduction to this hot topic, and then the second part is more about our experiences so far with this data center. Green computing, it has been talked about a lot, and as often happens, sometimes these talks we continue talking for a long time, so that we already get bored with it before we have implemented it. But it is a thing that we need to take care of, and it's a very good thing that our dear Europe has already taken actions regarding that, and we all need to think about it. Of course, ICT sector, if you look at the figures, this Gartner report is saying that, quite an old one, but anyhow, saying that it's only 2% that IT is responsible for the global carbon emissions. One could say that why do we bother? Of course we need to bother. Everybody needs to take care of their share, and this is what we try to do now. Thinking about the EU and its policies, what kind of policies and tools there are already in place, I don't go through all of these, and this might not be a comprehensive list, so therefore it's named as examples of policies and tools that guide us in the direction of green. And one question to this audience, or something to think about, that if we think about these topics that were discussed already in this session, that could we somehow think about optimizing the resources on European level? So do we have enough policies from the Commission that help us in this European-wide thinking, or is it still more easy to think about the optimization on national level? I'm sure it is, but what could the Commission do for us from this policy perspective? That is maybe something to think about. When we continue with this digging into this IT area more deeply, we notice that based on this Smart 2020 report, that again, talking about data centers is the smallest one of this, the smallest piece of this cake. But it must be said that data centers, the amount of them is growing. They utilize a lot of power, so again, we cannot forget that. So this is what we are now taking care of, trying to take care of this slice of this cake. And of course, as said already, so the data centers consume huge amounts of energy. There is a lot of room for improvement. Virtualization and cloud computing does something, but we still need to have the data centers. And one good thing about this is that when we look at the green data centers, they are more cost efficient than the previous ones. So if somebody does not care about green, somebody or the others, they do care about the costs. So there is a strong relationship between this greenness and cost effectiveness, and that is a good thing. This is a report. I hope I was allowed to use this material. This is from CB Richard Ellis, which is a consultancy company very much dealing with data centers also. So I wanted to understand the picture, the total picture of the European data center markets, and this is what we got from one of our partners just recently. A report included this data. So all in all, it seems that this is split now between Tier 1 and Tier 2, and these tiers are used in so many ways in different communities. So this one means by the Tier 1 data centers means the biggest ones that are now darker green in this slide, and the Tier 2 data centers are the smaller ones. So all in all, it's something like 700,000 square meters of data center space that we have in Europe with this Tier 1 data centers, and an additional 100,000 square meters in the Tier 2 data centers. The Tier 1 data centers are located in big cities: London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Madrid, Paris. And the reason for that seems to be that they are data centers, or there are lots of data centers for the financial sector and also for retail and wholesale industry. When we look at these smaller ones that are listed here, I'm sure you have not heard of Summa in Finland, which is one location which Google chose as one of its data center locations. There are like unknown places where data centers are established, and the reasons may be cooling, free cooling possibilities, cheap power, taxation. It could be some incentives. So there is life outside these Tier 1 data centers also. The location drivers, as we have seen it, it's maybe the first one is cost. The cost of real estate, the cost of construction, the cost of power, energy, and these taxational and incentive topics. But then it's of course about connectivity, cost of networks, accessibility, and then greenness. And sometimes when talking to commercial customers, they put it very clearly that it's cost and nothing else. The total cost of the data center activity, that is what matters. But as said earlier, there is a relationship, and that is the good thing. Here is one a bit difficult slide, including even one Finnish word, this 2000 luku. I could not take it out of this slide. It was so embedded there, so don't let it disturb you too much. But this slide tries to tell you that it has improved. So previously, when we wanted to have 1 megawatt for our IT equipment, we needed actually to buy 2.5 megawatts. Because there was so much waste, we were our additional equipment in the data center was consuming so much energy. So in this data center business, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this PUE figure, which is explained here to the right of this slide. So total facility power divided by IT equipment power. It's an efficiency figure which tells about the effectiveness of the data center. So currently in 2010 we are in, or 1.15 is possible. And if you look at the cost figures taken from Finland, this is based on Finnish electricity prices. So from the 19s we have been able to split the cost into a half of its origin. And it's of course a big thing thinking about this. It's one of the major costs of a data center, this electricity cost. This was the introduction to Green IT, and then now I will continue with the more detailed presentation of our data center in Finland. This is one green data center example. There are many others, and this is the one we are planning to place our next supercomputer also. And you see the red dot, the second red dot that is up to the north. That's where the location is. So it's not, we talk about northern Finland, but it's actually in the middle of Finland if you take a geographical look. This was the project was started already last year, before my time. So as far as I have understood the targets for this data center, where to have it, the main target was scalability. Many data centers think at some stage that this is the data center where we can stay for the next 10 years or 20 years. But after 3 years they noticed that, oops, this is too small. And what CSC wanted, we wanted that this is really a place where we can stay for the next 15 years. That is the long-term commitment that we are talking about, 15 years. And we also wanted to think about this space as a place where possible consolidation and synergy benefits could take place. So first thinking about our Finnish state and the organizations, or research organizations and educational organizations, maybe they could also utilize the space. We wanted to have a green data center. As we are like a company owned by the state, we want to be as green as possible, take care of our environment. We wanted to utilize brownfield facility, meaning that we utilize an existing building. We do not want to build a new one. And we also wanted to have a certificate for our activities so that it will guide us further and force us to look into the details and all kinds of matters that need to be thought through when thinking about the data center. Like all kinds of transport issues and waste and landfills and all kinds of issues that are related to a building. We wanted to have this PUE figure as low as possible. We were talking about 1.5, and renewable energy should be used, and we also thought about heat reuse, that we would like to have some use for the heat generated by the data center. Cost efficiency, of course, reliability, of course, and of course we want to follow all the policies and guidelines we get from the EU. And then, of course, we had these practical considerations and the topics to solve, where to find the optimal solution or the location, and question or answers to the questions. And we started in Finland, as many organizations do. And now, I don't know whether to say sorry or what, but these slides come from a company called Invest in Finland, or an organization called Invest in Finland. There are similar organizations in many countries, and there is a lot about how good Finland is. Finland is a good country, but there are many other good countries in Europe. I know that. And what must specifically, how do I get back with this? Is this thread maybe going back? Yes. So specifically, I think this is true for many of the Scandinavian countries, those arguments that are stated here. So there is a modern and reliable infrastructure. Our education has had a very good evaluations from the PISA study, for example, but also the university is not too bad. Our economical political conditions are good, and then all of these issues that are listed here, I'll come back to the energy prices and also to the cool climate. No major earthquakes was one thing that I thought when having a small talk in Finland with one organization, that do we need to list this one? Because it's so obvious to us in Finland that we have not had earthquakes in Finland. But unfortunately, that was the day when the Japanese earthquake took place. And then I realized that this is, of course, so true still and will be. But in our case, it's not. We don't have any major storms, no volcanoes, no tornadoes, no tsunamis. So it's some meteorologists think that this is a dull country in that sense. And then this is also kind of a sad story that there is a lot of empty space because we have had massive paper and pulp industry facilities in Finland, and the facilities are still there, but the industry has escaped to lower cost countries in many cases. But for us it's now an opportunity, there is space. Then if we move on to the climate, this is not maybe so clear the picture, but it's talking about the temperatures in Europe and presenting it in a slide format, what we already know that it's very cold in Finland. So this blue area on the left-hand side is telling about the temperatures that are below 27 degrees, dew point below 15 degrees, and having 8,000 hours, meaning 11 months of that kind of situation. So below 27 degrees for 11 months of the year. So of course a big area of Europe is covered, but 27 degrees is quite high. Then when we talk about free cooling and waters, then this one was talking now. I had to look in Wikipedia because they talked about wet bulb temperature, and it was quite complicated how they defined it, a system with gas and vapor. But I thought that maybe this is about water temperatures. So if I interpreted it correctly, this picture is about how many hours are the waters below 10 degrees Celsius. And of course now when we look at the map and our data center, the location, it's approximately where they have this blue area. So according to our information, it should be possible to have 10 months of free water cooling in this new location. What happens then about these energy prices? As we are getting closer and closer to the gala event, I won't go too deep into this picture, but you see this is taken from Eurostat, the European Commission statistics, 2010 prices. This is jumping a bit now, and telling that our energy prices are quite good. We are the third on this picture. This is prices without taxes. And then also about the green energy or electricity. There we are on the 5th position, so not bad that either, but could be better. About the reliability of our electricity, there is also like a Council of Energy Regulators that are benchmarking the quality of power infrastructure, and we have a very reliable power infrastructure in Finland, so that should not be a problem either. So, but you can look at the benchmarking reports if you want to have some statistics. I didn't include it here. About the chosen location in more detail, then I had these slides about Finland. It was an obvious choice for CSC. We started to look at the location in Finland, but then within Finland there were multiple choices or alternatives. And then we chose this Kajaani place. It is a brownfield area where there is this old paper mill. It's located by the river Kajaani. I'll come back to those figures still. We have originally thought that we would like to have 8,000 square meters of this data center, which is totaling 16,000 square meters. So it's a huge, huge place. We start with less. We start with 4,000 square meters or less. But the picture on the right-hand side is saying that the CSC in the corner is not the only one. It's not the plan that we would be the only ones. As you see from the square meters, we are maximum 50% of the data center, but we could also be less. And then about this location, further details about it. There are multiple hydropower stations on site. So if one has a problem, the other one comes and will continue. And in addition to those, there is a bioenergy plant also. So paper and pulp industry, they have needed a lot of water, they have needed a lot of power, so therefore this is a good location. Talking about, I don't know how detailed information you want to have, but for example, about the water, it's possible from the current pumps to get 3 cubic meters per second of cooling water. So huge amounts of cooling water available from the existing pumps. 5 minutes, okay. And there is no flood risk either, although it's located close to the river. It's like 134 meters above sea level, and the maximum 50 years maximum is 121, so there is 50 meters still to go, so no floods. When talking about network conditions, I'm not the best expert here, but we have experts who can ask or answer your question if you have a question related to networks. But of course, this Kajaani is located in HEAnet has a network connection to Kajaani, which is the city, and then the challenge is to build the last mile, but it should not be a big thing to build it from the current hub to the data center. This is how it looks, or how it looked a couple of months ago. So the paper machine has been taken away, and there is a huge hole that needs to be blocked with concrete blocks, and they have been ordered. And this is another picture of that place, and this is how we plan how it will look like in the future. This is now almost the last one, but we did not look, or the first thing that we looked for is that we wanted to have a scalable, cost and energy efficient data center solution for ourselves. But as said earlier, we thought of this possibility that it would be so good if some others could utilize this place also. And especially with this audience, I wonder whether this would be an opportunity, one of the opportunities for hosting European research infrastructure or utilizing this data center for your purposes. If you consider, you can anytime be in contact with me, for example, or if you know some other persons from CSC, please utilize the most efficient route and try to find information. We are very willing to share these best practices and the lessons we have learned. Partnerships, this is something that is so important in this current networked world. And we have noticed already by now that these data center initiatives, they require multifaceted competencies and joint efforts. This data center is a mega data center. I don't know whether it should be spelled this way or not, but anyhow, a very big data center. According to the information that I have, it represents the quarterly growth of the European data center space. So also in that perspective, it is a very big one. And CSC is only one tenant in this data center, but we are maybe the lead customer or anchor tenant, the first one. So we have been participating very much in the planning of it, and also all these technical things that we have tested, whether the requirements are met. And it seems to be a data center that will very well suit our purposes. It will be a cost-efficient solution for us. So I'm sure that it could be that for you too. This is something that has not been very much discussed within CSC, but it would be nice if we could be one of the open research data centers. If you have not looked into Facebook's Open Compute project, there is a link to that. Please take a look at that. They said that so far we have been talking about open source, but it should be now it's time to talk about open data center projects. How can we share the information, and they really have put a lot of information on that side. And then talking about these partnerships, we have found that now we are talking to traditional paper and pulp industry, telecom and IT. We talk with large global companies, we talk with small local organizations, we talk with governmental and commercial companies. It takes some time before these kinds of different groups understand each other, but it's very, very fruitful and good partnerships that will come out of this kind of new meetings. The last slide is here. We have the decision about Kajaani was made last autumn, and now we are have been in the pre-planning phase where a lot of technical planning has been done together with the paper mill persons, and there was the first version, and then there was the improved version of that, and now we think we are ready from this pre-planning perspective. But some planning is still left to be done, but we still expect that we should be in production next year, after 1 year from this date. And I think that there is so much talk about data centers at the moment that once there is experience-based information on data centers, on the energy efficiency, on the greenness, the drawbacks that there might be, there is going to be an interesting story about our data center next year. So if there is a continuation to the story, the next episode, I'm sure will be even more interesting than this one. Thank you.
Are there any questions, Marjut?
Thank you. I applaud you for suggesting making this an open research center on data centers. There's a lot of misleading facts and information out there. First is PUE. PUE that's quoted out there is always based on what's called a fully loaded data center, when it's full of equipment. Most data centers take many years to get there, and the PUEs can be significantly higher.
Yeah.
Number two is we've undertaken a couple studies with San Diego Supercomputing Center in Canada in this area. Things you may want to look at are ice cooling instead of water cooling, as well as what's called turbine spin-up power, which is usually the utilities just dump it, and you can get it for free sometimes. And so there's a lot of opportunities here you can do if you have an open center. So I encourage that.
About this PUE, we have also found out that people calculate the figures very differently. And for our case, the figures were so that when we start with 2 megawatt, approximately, and then we might have a PUE of 1.3. And then if we go to 16, then the PUEs should go down, then we should have maybe 1.1. And what I have heard from our experts is that we try to calculate it as cruelly as possible, so that we don't try to fool with this figure. We don't have any need for that, but it's very true that you can get very different figures and different results, and everybody is talking about PUE, so you need to be careful and look into the way how it's calculated. About this ice cooling, I haven't heard too much of that, but definitely there are various methods how you can do the cooling, as it's already currently today the situation. And this is what we are now planning to do in Kajaani. And let's see whether it's a good or whether there could be better possibilities. But this is what we now plan to test.
So any other questions? How much?
Meanwhile, at least to me, it happens often that the questions come afterwards. So I added my email address there. So if you have a question that you remember on your way back home, so please send me an email.
Ola Kutten from HEAnet. Did you consider resiliency and multiple data centers?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I don't think we quite heard it.
Would it be better to have multiple data centers so that you can have a complete resiliency in case one data center goes down?
Multiple data centers. Actually, currently we do have already 2 data centers in the Helsinki area, and we would very much like to have less. We don't want to have 3, so most probably we will have 2 altogether. But this is going to be the one where we don't have such strict security requirements maybe as we have in our one of our current data centers in the Helsinki area, and also the place where we can grow.
So I have one final question then. What's your sort of projection of take-up and demand for this? Have you got lots of people already queuing at the door?
Well, it's difficult to tell because there is a lot of interest in this. But then, of course, the details only reveal whether this is a good solution for somebody. So at the moment we have done some or it's not CSC who is marketing the place. It's not, we are the tenant only, we are only one of them. But we are working jointly with the local organization that is marketing the space. By the way, this of course is a development area or a developing area where lots of workplaces were lost because of this paper mill that is empty now. So the government is supporting that, and there is a lot of effort trying to get some new workplaces to the region. So together with that organization, with that local organization, we have tried to get an understanding of the interest. And there is a lot of interest. This initial interest is there, but then of course it takes a lot of time to go through with each and every one about this. Is this good enough for you? Do we meet your requirements? And we are in the process. Currently, we have one global company that is so interested in this place that we have one written commitment already from that one, but it's not final yet. There is still one, but I don't know. Do we have?
It's a very good question.
Was the question whether we are the owners?
Who is the owner?
The owner of this data center, the premises are owned by the paper company.
You'll own all the hardware?
We will own the hardware. the IT infrastructure in the building will belong to us.
So where does the investment actually come from? Is it the government investing in this? Are you putting in the money? Is it a conglomerate? You've got various stakeholders there. I mean, we've just had the discussion about how do you invest in these things. Where's the money coming from?
Yeah, good question. So this paper company is investing in the transformation of that that paper mill to be a data center. So it's doing all the things that we saw in these pictures, like filling in the holes and taking away the paper machines and doing the things that they need to do with the walls and so that it's externally the walls are good and the space is empty and all that. So they do invest in that a lot. And then in addition, there is some governmental support. As I mentioned, this area is an area where there is a lot of unemployment, so we do get some support. And CSC as a tenant will pay the rent, and we are talking about an, what's the term, investment rent. So we are committed to be there for 15 years. And then the remaining parts, there will be the local player that will be funding a bit, and then the rest will come from the next tenants.
Thank you very much. We'll, I think we'll close now. I've been asked to make one announcement. If you haven't picked up, is it some kind of small camera thing? You can see I haven't bothered to pick it up yet. That's a sort of free gift from the trainer desk. Then you're asked to do that. Presumably they don't want to take them all home. And just a reminder, in case you need it, that the trams will be leaving at, I don't know. Come on, somebody shout. When are the trams leaving? 7 o'clock. Right, thank you. So be there or be square. Personally, I'm very fond of trams, so I might just stay on the tram and not bother with the reception. But I hope I will see you all there, and please join me in thanking our speakers.